Don't be afraid. I'm here, Maid's toddler whispered. She took care for the Comatose Billionaire. Hey, stop scrolling for a second. One moment changed everything that night. And it started with a 3-year-old girl standing in a hospital hallway, holding a paper cup of water like it was the most important thing in the world. Nobody in that hospital knew her name. Nobody knew that in a few hours, she would say 7 words to a man who hadn't spoken in 11 days. 7 words that would make a room full of doctors put down their charts and just stare. I wasn't going to tell this story, but I think you need to hear it. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know who's sitting with me for this one. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about wealth or hospitals or miracles. It's about how sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the only one loud enough to reach a person the whole world has already given up on. Stay with me till the end. I promise you this one's going to stay with you. Some mornings start ordinary and end up changing a family forever. Maria Alvarez had worked as a housekeeper for the Whitfield family for almost 2 years. She wasn't just any housekeeper. She cleaned, cooked, and quietly kept the enormous Whitfield estate in Connecticut running the way a heartbeat keeps a body alive. Nobody noticed her much. That was fine with Maria. She had one job that mattered more than any paycheck: raising her daughter Sophia, a bright-eyed 3-year-old with a laugh that could fill an empty mansion. Sophia went everywhere with her mother during the day. The Whitfields didn't mind. In fact, the old housekeeper before Maria had warned her that the family barely noticed staff at all, let alone a toddler trailing behind one. Just keep her quiet, she'd said. Mr. Whitfield doesn't like noise. Mr. Daniel Whitfield was 34 years old and already one of the wealthiest men on the East Coast. He'd built a tech company from a garage into a corporation worth billions, and somewhere in that climb, he'd lost almost everyone who once mattered to him. His parents had passed years ago. His marriage had ended quietly and bitterly 2 years back. He lived alone in a house with 14 rooms and barely used 4 of them. Maria had only spoken to him a handful of times. He was polite, distant, always somewhere else in his mind, even when he was standing right in front of you. Sophia, though, had a different relationship with him entirely. One built on nothing but curiosity and fearlessness. She'd wave at him through the kitchen window. She'd leave little drawings on his office door. He never responded, but he never threw them away either. Maria had noticed that. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, everything changed. Daniel had been driving back from a business trip late at night when another car ran a red light. The crash made the local news for exactly 1 day before being replaced by other headlines. But for Maria, that day never really ended. She got the call from the estate manager just after 6 a.m. Mr. Whitfield was alive. But barely. He'd suffered severe head trauma. He was in a coma. Nobody knew if or when he would wake up. The Whitfield business empire didn't stop for tragedy. Board members flew in for meetings held in hospital conference rooms. Lawyers whispered about contingency plans. Reporters camped outside hoping for a statement. And somewhere in all of that noise, a man lay in a hospital bed, completely alone, machines breathing for him, monitors tracking a heartbeat that refused to give any hint of when, or if, he'd come back. Maria kept working. It felt strange to keep dusting shelves and cooking meals for an empty house, but the estate manager insisted the household needed to keep running, for when Mr. Whitfield returns. Whether anyone believed that or not, nobody said out loud. One evening, about a week after the accident, Maria was called to the hospital to drop off paperwork the family lawyer needed signed by the estate. She had no choice but to bring Sophia along. Daycare had already closed for the night. She thought she'd be in and out in 10 minutes. She was wrong. As she walked down the sterile white hallway toward Daniel's private room, Sophia's small hand gripped hers tightly. The little girl had never been inside a hospital before. The beeping machines, the hushed voices, the smell of antiseptic. It should have scared her. But Sophia wasn't scared. She was curious. "Mama," she whispered, tugging at Maria's sleeve. "Is that the man from the pictures on the wall?" Maria followed her daughter's gaze through the glass window of the room. There he was, Daniel Whitfield, once one of the most powerful men in the country, now lying motionless, pale, tubes running in and out of his arms, a ventilator rhythmically rising and falling on his chest. "Yes, baby," Maria said softly. "That's Mr. Whitfield. He's very sick." Sophia stared for a long moment, tilting her head the way children do when they're studying something they don't understand but feel deeply anyway. "Can I say hi to him?" Maria hesitated. The nurses had said visitors needed permission, and honestly, she doubted anyone would want a toddler wandering into a comatose billionaire's private room. But something about the quiet plea in Sophia's eyes made her pause. "Just for a minute," Maria whispered. "And you have to be very gentle." "Okay." Sophia nodded seriously, like she'd just been given the most important task of her life. What happened next, none of them expected. Nobody in that room believed a whisper could reach a man 3 days from being taken off life support, until it did. The room was cold and quiet except for the steady hiss of the ventilator. Maria stepped inside first, glancing nervously at the nurse stationed near the door, who gave a small, tired nod of permission. Sophia walked in behind her mother, small sneakers squeaking softly against the tile floor. She stopped beside the hospital bed and looked up at the man lying there. His face was bruised in places, his skin pale under the fluorescent lights. To anyone else, he looked like a stranger wrapped in wires and machines. To Sophia, he was simply the sad man from the pictures. She reached up, barely tall enough to see over the bed rail, and gently placed her small hand over his. "Sophia, careful," Maria whispered, stepping closer. But Sophia wasn't listening. She was staring at Daniel's still face with the kind of focused seriousness only small children seem capable of. Then, in a voice barely above a breath, she said the words that would echo through that hospital for weeks to come. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." The nurse near the door turned, startled. Maria's chest tightened. It was such a simple sentence, the kind of thing a mother might whisper to a scared child at night. But hearing it directed at a grown man, a stranger, a billionaire fighting for his life, it hit differently. It hit hard. For a moment nothing happened. The machines kept their steady rhythm. Maria gently pulled Sophia back, apologizing to the nurse, embarrassed and unsure of what had just come over her daughter. They left shortly after, Maria's mind buzzing with a strange, unexplainable feeling she couldn't quite name. She didn't think much more of it that night. Children said strange, sweet things all the time. It was probably nothing. But the next morning something shifted. A nurse on the overnight shift mentioned to the attending doctor that Daniel's heart rate had shown unusual, brief spikes of increased activity around 8:47 p.m., right around the time Maria and Sophia had been in the room. It was a small detail, easily dismissed as coincidence. Coma patients' vitals fluctuated constantly. Doctors saw it every day. Still, it was noted in his chart. 3 days later, Maria was called back to the estate to help prepare paperwork again, and once more daycare fell through, and once more Sophia came along. This time, when they passed by Daniel's floor, Sophia asked to see him again. Maria should have said no. She had every reason to. But there was something in her daughter's insistence, not stubbornness but a strange, calm certainty, that made her give in. This time, the nurse who'd been there before actually welcomed them in, curious herself after the report from a few nights earlier. "He's had some unusual moments," she admitted quietly to Maria. "Nothing the doctors can explain yet. But there's been increased brain activity on the monitor. Not much, but something." Sophia walked straight to the bed like she'd done it 100 times before. She placed her small hand over Daniel's again, careful of the 4-line, and leaned in close to his ear. "Hi again," she whispered. "It's me, Sophia. You don't have to be scared." My mama says brave people fight even when it's hard. I think you're brave too. The nurse's eyes welled up. Maria had to look away, her own throat tightening. Then the monitor beside the bed let out a soft series of beeps, different than before. The nurse's head snapped toward the screen. Daniel's fingers, resting limply on the blanket, twitched. Just slightly. Just enough. Oh my God, the nurse whispered, already reaching for the call button. Get the doctor. Now. Maria grabbed Sophia instinctively, pulling her back as two more nurses rushed in, followed by a doctor who immediately began checking Daniel's vitals, shining a light briefly into his eyes, checking pupil response. Pupils are reactive, the doctor said, almost in disbelief. That wasn't happening yesterday. It wasn't a miracle yet. It wasn't him waking up. But it was something, a crack of light in 11 days of complete darkness. And somehow, impossibly, it seemed connected to a 3-year-old girl's whispered words. Word began to spread through the hospital staff in hushed, disbelieving tones. The billionaire in room 412 was showing signs of neurological response, and it had happened twice now, both times right after the housekeeper's little girl had visited. Doctors, of course, remained cautious. Coincidence, some said. Correlation isn't causation, others reminded each other. But even the most skeptical among them couldn't fully explain why. Out of 11 days of complete stillness, the only measurable changes had occurred within minutes of Sophia's visits. Maria didn't know what to think. Part of her felt frightened. Frightened of false hope, frightened of being blamed if something went wrong, frightened of getting too close to a family whose world was so different from her own. But another part of her, the part that watched her daughter's fearless, gentle heart reach toward a stranger without hesitation, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Oh. And neither of them had any idea just how much bigger this story was about to become. What the doctors discovered next made even the most experienced neurologist in that hospital go completely silent. Within 2 days, hospital administration had taken notice. Daniel Whitfield wasn't just any patient. He was one of the most influential businessmen in the country, and any change in his condition, positive or negative, mattered enormously. The head neurologist, Dr. Elena Park, decided to personally review every piece of data from the past week. What she found stopped her cold. The brain activity spikes weren't random. They lined up, almost to the minute, with the 2 visits from the housekeeper's daughter. Dr. Park had seen countless coma cases in her career. Some patients responded to family voices, some to music, some to nothing at all for months or years. But she had never seen a case respond so specifically, so consistently, to one particular child's voice. She requested a meeting with Maria the next morning. Maria arrived nervous, half expecting to be told she and Sophia were no longer allowed near Daniel's room, worried she'd overstepped boundaries she had no right to cross as just the housekeeper. Instead, Dr. Park sat her down gently and asked a question she never expected. Would you and your daughter be willing to keep visiting him? Under medical supervision, of course. I think there's something happening here we don't fully understand yet, but I don't want to lose whatever thread is pulling him back. Maria was stunned. You want us to keep coming? I know how strange this sounds, Dr. Park admitted. But in 11 days, nothing else has worked. Family friends have visited. Business partners have talked to him about the company, hoping familiar topics might trigger something. His ex-wife came once. Nothing changed his brain activity the way these last 2 visits did. That evening, with permission now official, Maria brought Sophia back for a 3rd visit, this time not sneaking in nervously, but walking in with a doctor and 2 nurses observing quietly from the side of the room. Sophia, completely unaware of the medical significance of what she was doing, simply climbed onto the little step stool the nurse had placed beside the bed and began talking to Daniel like she always had. About her day, about the dog she saw in the parking lot, about how her mama made the best pancakes in the whole world. You should try her pancakes when you wake up, Sophia said matter-of-factly. They have chocolate chips. Mama says too much chocolate is bad, but I think a little bit is good for feeling better. The monitors spiked again. Stronger this time. Dr. Park watched, both scientifically fascinated and quietly moved beyond words. There was no medical explanation strong enough yet to describe what was happening. Some theorized it might be about emotional safety, about a familiar gentle presence breaking through the isolation of a comatose mind. Others whispered it might simply be extraordinary timing. But whatever it was undeniable. Word of the miracle toddler, as one of the night shift nurses had started calling her, began to spread through hospital gossip. It reached administrators. It reached board members of Whitfield's company, several of whom had flown in hoping for updates, mostly worried about what would happen to the company if Daniel didn't recover. When they heard that a housekeeper's daughter had somehow triggered the first real neurological response in 11 days, some were skeptical, even irritated, worried about unqualified people being near such a high-profile patient. Others were desperate enough to try anything. Then came the twist nobody saw coming. On the 4th visit, 5 days after that first whispered, "Don't be afraid, I'm here," something extraordinary happened. Sophia was mid-sentence, telling Daniel about a butterfly she'd seen outside the hospital window, when his fingers, for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, closed weakly around her small hand. The room went completely silent. Maria's breath caught in her throat. The nurse standing by the door dropped her clipboard. Dr. Park, who happened to be present for the visit, rushed forward, eyes wide, checking his vitals with trembling hands. "He's responding to touch," she whispered, almost not believing her own words. "Real, voluntary movement." Sophia, completely unfazed by the sudden chaos around her, just smiled down at Daniel's hand wrapped gently around hers. "See," she said softly, as if this had been obvious all along. "I told you. You don't have to be scared." Nobody in that room could speak. Some of the staff were crying. Maria stood frozen, tears streaming silently down her face, watching her 3-year-old daughter hold the hand of a man the whole world had nearly given up on. It would be 2 more days before Daniel Whitfield opened his eyes. And when he finally did, confused, disoriented, surrounded by unfamiliar faces in white coats, the first thing he tried to say wasn't a name of a business partner, or a question about his company, or even about his ex-wife. It was one word, barely audible, forced out through days of unused vocal cords. "Sophia." Everyone expected a happy ending right there. Nobody expected what came next to test everything the little girl had already given him. The recovery wasn't instant or easy. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness for the first 2 days after waking. His mind foggy. His memories scattered like puzzle pieces someone had dropped on the floor. He didn't remember the accident. He barely remembered his own name at first. But somehow, buried in whatever fragmented awareness had kept him tethered to life during those 11 silent days, he remembered a small voice. When he was finally lucid enough to have real conversations, one of his first requests startled the entire medical team. "The little girl," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "Bring her back. Please." The nurses exchanged surprised glances. Dr. Park gently explained who Sophia was, the daughter of his housekeeper, a child who had simply wandered in one evening out of pure curiosity, completely unaware of the weight her small words would carry. Daniel closed his eyes for a long moment, processing this. "She talked to me," he whispered. "I could hear her. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. But I heard her voice, and it was the only thing that felt real, like an anchor." When Maria and Sophia visited again, this time with Daniel fully awake, sitting upright, weak but present, the room felt entirely different. Sophia, without an ounce of hesitation, climbed right up beside his bed the moment she saw him. "You woke up," she said, beaming, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel, still adjusting to speaking, managed a small, exhausted smile. "Because of you," he said softly. "But recovery is rarely a straight line, And just as the story seemed to be settling into its happy chapter, an unexpected complication arose. One that had nothing to do with medicine. Word had spread beyond the hospital. A local news outlet caught wind of the story. Billionaire wakes from coma after housekeeper's toddler visits him, and within days it exploded online. Reporters camped outside the Whitfield estate. Strangers speculated wildly on social media, some calling it a beautiful miracle, others cynically suggesting Maria had somehow planned this for financial gain, accusing her of manipulating a vulnerable, wealthy man's recovery for personal benefit. The accusations cut deep. Maria, who had never once thought about money or opportunity throughout this entire ordeal, found herself facing public scrutiny simply for being a mother who let her daughter say a kind word to a sick man. She considered quitting her job entirely, worried that staying might make things worse, worried the Whitfield family's lawyers might see her as some kind of liability rather than the woman who'd quietly, faithfully worked in their home for 2 years. She almost resigned the next morning. But before she could hand in her notice, Daniel, still recovering, still weak, but sharper every day, asked to speak with her privately. "I heard about the news stories," he said carefully. "The accusations." Maria's stomach twisted. "Mr. Whitfield, I promise you, I never wanted any of this attention. Sophia she's a child. She didn't understand what she was doing. I should have kept her away from your room. I'm sorry if this has caused any trouble for you or your company." Daniel shook his head slowly, his eyes tired but earnest. "Maria, do you know what it's like to have everything? Money, power, a company worth billions, and still feel completely alone?" His voice cracked slightly. "For 2 years you've cleaned my house, cooked my meals, and I barely acknowledged you as a person. And your daughter, a 3-year-old who had no reason to care about me at all, was the only one who reached through 11 days of silence to remind me I was still human. Still worth fighting for." He paused, gathering strength for what he said next. "I'm not going to let anyone punish you or her for that. Whatever the media says, whatever the board says, none of it matters more than what actually happened in that room." It was a turning point, not just in Daniel's physical recovery, but in something deeper. A shift in how he saw the people around him, the ones he'd overlooked for years while chasing success. He began insisting Maria and Sophia visit not as the housekeeper doing a favor, but as guests welcomed openly, without hesitation or apology. Slowly, the public narrative began to shift too. Interviews with hospital staff confirmed the timeline, the documented neurological changes, the undeniable medical records showing exactly when improvements had occurred. It wasn't manipulation. It wasn't a scheme. It was simply an innocent child's unconditional kindness reaching a man who had nearly slipped away in isolation. And slowly, even the skeptics began to soften. But the story wasn't over yet. Because full recovery still lay ahead, and Daniel Whitfield, despite waking up, was about to face the hardest emotional battle of his life, learning how to actually live again, not just survive. What happened at Daniel's first family dinner back home would bring the whole story full circle, in a way nobody expected. Weeks passed. Daniel's physical recovery progressed steadily. Physical therapy, speech exercises, careful monitoring, until the day finally came when doctors cleared him to return home. The Connecticut estate, once cold and echoing with emptiness, suddenly felt different the moment he walked back through its doors. It changed. Anyone close to him could see it. The man who once buried himself in boardrooms and quarterly reports now paused to notice things he'd ignored for years. The way morning light hit the kitchen windows, the sound of laughter from another room, the quiet dedication of the people who kept his life running smoothly without ever asking for recognition. One evening, about a month after coming home, Daniel asked Maria and Sophia to join him for dinner, not as staff serving a meal, but seated at the table with him. Maria hesitated at first. It felt strange, crossing a boundary that had always felt fixed and permanent. But Daniel insisted, gently but firmly. "Please," he said. "I don't want to eat alone in this house anymore. Not after everything. That night, sitting at a table that had once hosted business dinners worth millions of dollars, Daniel Whitfield sat across from a housekeeper and her 3-year-old daughter, sharing a simple homemade meal, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he laughed, really laughed, at something silly Sophia said about her stuffed rabbit needing its own hospital bed too. It was such a small moment, but it meant everything. Over the following months, life slowly transformed for everyone involved. Daniel returned to his company gradually, but with a noticeably different perspective. He established a foundation focused on supporting hospital neurological research, inspired directly by his own experience of near-total isolation during his coma. He also quietly ensured Maria's daughter would never have to worry about her future, setting up an education fund for Sophia, though he was careful to frame it not as charity, but as gratitude for a debt words could never fully repay. Maria, for her part, stayed on with the Whitfield household, not because she needed the job anymore, but because somewhere in those strange, terrifying weeks, an unlikely bond had formed. Daniel had become less of an employer and more of, in his own words, family in the only way that ever really mattered. As for Sophia, she grew up mostly unaware of just how extraordinary her small act of kindness had been. To her, it was never about miracles or medical mysteries. It was simple. A sad man was scared and alone, and she didn't want him to feel that way anymore. That was the whole reason. Sometimes the biggest lessons come from the smallest people. We spend so much of our lives believing that comfort has to be complicated, that healing takes grand gestures, expensive treatments, powerful words. But sometimes all a hurting heart needs is one simple truth, spoken without fear or hesitation. You are not alone. Daniel Whitfield had everything money could buy, and none of it reached him in that hospital bed. What reached him was a 3-year-old's whispered promise that she was there, that he didn't have to be afraid. In a world that often overlooks the quietest, gentlest voices, this story is a reminder that kindness doesn't need permission, status, or wealth to make a difference. Sometimes it just needs a willing heart. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that even in your darkest, most isolated moments, someone's small act of compassion can be the light that pulls you back, then I want you to do something for me. Hit that like button, not for me but for every person out there who needs to be reminded that they matter, even when they feel invisible. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this one. Real, emotional, human stories that remind us what truly matters in life. And if you know someone who needs a little hope today, please share this with them. Because you never know, your kindness, however small, might just be the thing that brings someone back from the dark. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.